Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of. You know what? I'm gonna start this tradition, episode 2
Right.
of liking movies. The podcast where we have a title and a premise, and the premise is that we are three friends who like movies, and we pick a topic for the week, and then we each pose a question to the other two regarding that topic, and then we talk about it. So if you were looking for a podcast about three people you've never heard of talking about movies, you found it.
That they like.
That they like. Yeah. Okay. I didn't run this by you guys, but I thought maybe since we're towards the beginning of the run of the podcast, I hope we're not toward the end of the run. I think we're at the beginning end. If we could just go around and do like a quick bio of like our background, just kind of like where you went to school, and what your relationship is to film right now. And while you guys are thinking, I'll answer those two questions first. My name's Andrew Price, and I went to film school in Portland, Oregon, at the Northwest Film School. No, the Northwest Film Center School of Film. Oh boy. And it's so funny. I went there and I teach there, and I should know the name. And I would describe myself as a potentially failed writer director, and but I am still pursuing screenwriting. Inju's shaking his head. He's like, "No, you're not." I definitely haven't directed anything in a long time. I am actively writing.
There you go.
And yeah, that's my relation to film right now is a film fan and a aspiring and a film instructor. Jordan, over to you.
I am Jordan. I like movies. I like making movies. I don't like people who don't like movies.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Portland State University, and I also took one class at the Northwest Film Center when I was in college, and I work there sometimes on occasion, not right now. Yeah, I really like I make a lot of movies. I like watching movies. Just I don't know how to be more simple than that.
And when you say you like making movies, and you make a lot of movies, you make about 2 movies a year, isn't that right? From very like shorts, features, but it's usually about 2, right?
Yeah, at the very least. Like,
okay.
This year, what have we made this year? We're gonna start filming 2 features this Monday, actually. So yeah, that would be 2 movies a year at the most. And then last year we made a few. I can't remember how many, but we made a good handful. So yeah.
Yeah. Injun.
Hello. My name is Injun. I went to school. Wait. Oh, right. Yeah. I went to Vassar College in upstate New York, and majored in film at there. And I have worked at the Film Center, and that's how we all met.
That's how we met.
Yeah, it was a wonderful origin story for this podcast, really. And yeah, my relationship to movies now is more of a in the criticism side of things. I don't end up making much movies these days, but in terms of the movie making aspects of it, I really do enjoy editing and writing. Those are the two main things. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for indulging me and doing a little intros. Okay, first I want to start with some follow-up. Last week, Jordan asked Injun and I what the first movie was that made us cry. I could not come up with the name of this movie about a little girl who loses her mom in a car accident, and like the first scene is her dad telling her that her mom is dead and he's like not handling it well, and this little 4-year-old just gives an amazing performance, and in fact she won Best Actress at I think the Venice Film Festival. And the name of the movie is Pawnette. So that there followed it up. Pawnette. Injun, did you ever end up remembering what your first movie that made you cry was?
I still don't know, to be honest. I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh, like wait, no, I don't know. I thought
It's a blank. Can you give us one movie that you've ever shed a single tear watching? You don't have to. You don't have to.
I don't know. I don't really.
You're not an easy cry, though, right?
Yeah, this is true.
It's hard to get you to cry. We will do it
before the end of this podcast.
Yeah,
I'll be weeping at my desk, and yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you. That ends our follow-up segment, and now I'm going to introduce the topic. The theme of this week is sequels. Last week it was first. This week it's sequels. I don't know what next week's theme is going to be. I'm out of ideas, but I don't have to come up with it, so that's great. So now's the time for us to pose a longer form question around the topic of sequels, and I'm just going to take a show of hands here to see who wants to go first. Oh, Injun, you're up.
I mean, I can go first. So the question I have is probably, I don't think it's a very good question, is how I'm going to start this. But I was just thinking
Jordan
about.
and I will be the judges of that. We'll rate. I
guess,
promise.
I guess it's. I feel like it's going to be hard to come up with an answer on the spot, and maybe Andrew, I should have done what you did and just put it in the chat. But the question is basically, I feel like there's a lot of sequels. I guess honestly, the vast majority of sequels I feel like are less memorable, or maybe not the vast majority, but I feel like a lot of sequels are less memorable or come off feeling more unnecessary and are not as significant as the original movies that spawned these sequels, right? And I feel like my question is, which one of those among that pool would you say are ones that you do think are better? I guess, and I know that we've talked about in the past how I think Blade Runner 2049 is better than Blade Runner, right? So I guess that's the question. I guess it's along those lines, and I'll start off so I can.
Yep. I'm so sorry. You cut out for me at the very end of the question. So you were saying among the category of sequels that don't live up to the predecessor, what do you think are ones that you like, or what do you think are actually better, I guess? Oh, okay. So what are sequels do you feel like surpass the original?
that yes, what that are widely seen as no one really cares. And maybe that's complicated.
Okay.
Maybe that's complicating it, right? Maybe it doesn't need to be that annoying.
Underrated sequel is what you're asking in a way.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. That's it. Those two words. That was my question. I should have just led with that.
I give this question a 7 out of 10. I promised I'd rate it, and I rated it. All right, In June, you do get to go first answering this question.
Yes.
I can't begin.
So Ruth just texted me and said Men in Black 2 is better than Men in Black. But I think that's like a widely held opinion. Like I feel like most people agree with that. Although I don't know. Who knows? Maybe, I haven't seen either of them, so I actually can't say. Okay.
And
so,
I haven't seen either of them. Sorry, can we just Jordan, have you seen either of them?
I have.
Okay. Can you just settle this for us? Which one's better? You just
Ruth thinks Men in Black 2. Oh, sorry.
I
can't tell if you're conflicted because you don't care or because you care so much.
I haven't seen. I remember Men in Black 1. I don't remember Men in Black 2 as much. Is that the one with the lady alien? Oh wait, you
Men in Black 2 with the lady alien? Lady alien?
Or was that with Vincent Don? There was the gross bug alien who loved sugar, and then I think there was a lady alien in the other, and I can't remember which one was which.
We got to get Ruth in here. Ruth and Jordan got to battle this out.
Wow, so it's a tough question.
This podcast is called Three Guys Struggle to Remember Men in Black 1 and 2.
Yeah. There's a separate podcast that's just Jordan having to do his best to recount the entire Men in Black quadrilogy at this point.
Oh yeah, there was a new one.
There was a new one. That's true.
Okay, In June, take it away. What is the best underrated sequel?
Okay, I'll give two examples. I'll give one of them I think is more appropriate, is more applicable than the other one. But so I think one of them is I feel like the second Sherlock Holmes movie. Sherlock Holmes
with Robert Downey Jr. Okay.
Yeah. I feel like that came out and it was like relatively well received and people liked it, but then I think like it just faded away, right? Like no one really cared. It was another sequel. It was fine. But I actually really like it, and I think it's better than the first one.
Were they both Guy Ritchie?
Yeah. Both Guy Ritchie, both, as far as I know, like the original, like cast and crew. And I don't know, I really like it. It's just like it's like it makes everything bigger in that like very classic sequel, like in the way that you'd expect, but you know, it really works. I think it works really, really well. And then the second example I think is, and I think this is, there would probably be more people who would say, oh no, that's like I think that is widely held, is the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Which I know everyone loves the first one, and the first one is great, and the first one I still think is better than the second one, but I think the second one was actually very, very cool. Very, very, very cool.
Yeah.
So those are my examples of this very extreme.
And what's your answer?
Like out of those two?
Yeah.
I think Sherlock Holmes, the second Sherlock Holmes. Yeah.
Okay. That's the underloved sequel that you'll champion.
Yes, always. I'm sure. I know I've texted you guys about this too. So yeah.
I'm gonna answer only because it overlaps. My answer is kind of boring because it overlaps with a question that Jordan asked last week, which is he asked about severely underrated movies or movies that you're out of step with general mass opinion. And Rescuers Down Under, for me, I just don't understand why, like, it's not like, to me it's like so much better than a lot of the like Broadway Disney musicals, Broadway influenced Disney musicals that came out right exactly at the same time. It came out between Little Mermaid and I think it's Aladdin that followed it. And I just, yeah, I yeah, to me it's yeah, it's so much better, I feel like, than the first Rescuers, and just like doesn't get that much love. Like, to me, there should be theme park rides around it. It should be on T-shirts everywhere. I just, yeah, I wonder what would have happened if it had come out after Toy Story, because Toy Story kind of was like, you know, it was such a big moment, and then it sort of broke the like kids movies have to be musicals kind of thing. And so I wonder if it had come out after that, would it sort of have been in this other vein, and would it be sort of considered a proto Pixar kind of thing, or not proto, but yeah. Yeah, there's my answer. It's boring because it's the same as last week, but I think that's my answer.
This is a very loaded question in June, because you're talking to me about underrated movies, and like I'm like the champion of like the no, this movie is good, like kind of movie. My instant reaction is like Batman versus Superman. But that movie is like one of the most controversial comic book movies in the last decade. It's only that the critics like pretty like, it was critically panned all around, but there's still an intense fan reaction, both loving and hating it on either side. So I don't think I can call it underrated necessarily, just because it's so controversial. I definitely agree with you about Pirates 2, but I would say Pirates 3 and 4 as well. I think those are pretty solid movies.
When you say 4, are you talking about On Stranger Tides?
Yeah, the one with Penelope Cruz.
Whoa.
This might be a tangent, but like, you know, Pirates, it seemed like the Pirates movies were going to go in that direction after the first one. So like the first one is a pretty self-contained adventure, and then they did the back-to-back sequel, which is really just one movie in itself. And so I felt like it was going the route of James Bond, where every movie Jack Sparrow would team up with someone. And if you kind of look at it in that perspective, it's just a goofy, fun movie. I think it's pretty enjoyable. And I think the third one is like a really big, crazy conclusion, which is just absolutely insane. I have so many different movies I could ramble off. I don't know what, like, another one that comes to my head. Now, this is like definitely a movie that nobody likes, but Grown Ups 2, Adam Sandler and his friends, you know, hanging out. I think Grown Ups 1 is not that amazing. It's not for me. I think Grown Ups 2 is absolutely hysterical and gets really weird.
For Grown Ups 1.
Oh, wow. Were you? What did you do
like
on that movie? Were you an extra?
I didn't work on. No. I wasn't working on it. I was like a visitor.
Oh, okay.
Just as a tangent. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's
it was
cool.
They were shooting it near my high school. So.
Oh, that's cool. I think with comedy movies in general, you can forgive a lot of the filmmaking flaws if it's really funny to you. And 2 has some really obscure, weird, just bizarre humor in it that it feels like it was made by people who were like, let's just leave it in. We don't care. And it might be laziness. It might be truly just an attempt to do weird, bizarre humor, but it works for me. And so I think Grown Ups 2 is actually funnier than the first one. So I think that was the criteria. It had to be better than the first one, and it's an underrated movie. So I think that's my answer. Grown Ups 2.
It's a good answer. I like that.
It's the answer that will discredit everybody from listening to me for like all of my opinions, but whatever.
We just lost half our listeners.
And we kept like some questionable people. No, I'm
Yeah.
That's really funny. Injun, do you feel like your question was answered?
Yeah, totally. Those are some good answers. I like it. I've never seen The Rescuers or Rescuers Down Under. So,
Oh man.
Yeah.
Jordan, have you seen either of those films?
I've seen the first one a whole bunch, but not the second one.
Oh my gosh. This is what I'm talking about. This is but have you seen The Little Mermaid?
Yes.
Yeah, and The Little Mermaid's older by a year or two, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing how it I don't know, there was just something about the 90s that was like, if people are not singing and constantly dropping pop culture references, we are not here for this movie. Which I guess Beauty and the Beast moves away from the like pop culture psychic thing, which I think is great. But yeah, and this is, I could get into this whole thing on another time, which is I have like a deep passion to see all of those Grimm's fairy tales adapted, like not as Broadway musicals, but just as stories, just like straight stories. So I realize not all those movies are Brothers Grimm, obviously, but in general, the different fables and fairy tales that were all adapted in the 90s. And then when they announced all these remakes, I was like, oh, I'm so excited to see like a different take on these movies. And I did not get that quite. Although I think some of the remakes are good. Jordan, you're up.
So this is kind of a two-parter question, and this will probably take us many different places. I don't know where exactly, but there's two parts. I'll just ask the first part, and then I'll follow up later on in the conversation. Are sequels, by definition, lesser films? Are they, because I've seen this sentiment sometimes in like film discussions and film discourse that, Empire Strikes Back is a great movie, but not as good as A New Hope. A New Hope sets up that world entirely. It has the ground up to work from, whereas Empire relies on what was set up in A New Hope. For an example, so I'll throw that question out there. Just are sequels by definition lesser films?
That is such a good question, and I am going to throw another example out there that I give, which is when people ask about the best Harry Potter movie, I'm always like, you have to take into account that Sorcerer's Stone cast all those actors as like, it's just like, so, but you're kind of turning that argument on its head, which is like, if you totally buy into that idea, do you damn all sequels to have that trump card taken away from them? So Jordan, you want us to answer your question right now?
Yes. Or do you want me to ramble on about it?
I want you to ramble a bit.
Okay.
I want you to ramble.
So,
or, I mean, is it about this exact same idea of people, the first movie in a franchise automatically getting a boost because of the world building and all that goes into it.
Yeah, and just like kind of that idea that I've always heard of that mentality that sequels, they rely on the first movie. So therefore they automatically just aren't as good, because I think the idea there is that if you jumped into a sequel, you wouldn't understand necessarily the world, the characters, the motivations, things like that, which make them, which would make them lesser movies in some people's opinion. I don't have a particular stance. I don't feel it. Just kind of that kind of thinking raises more questions for me. Take something like the James Bond movies, for example. Those are movies that, you really don't need to see all of the James Bond movies to understand what's going on in any random James Bond movie, with the exception being maybe Casino Royale and Quantum Solace, and then
it's becoming less true.
And On Her Majesty's Secret Service going into, I think it was Diamonds Are Forever. I can't remember exactly. There's a thread between in both of those sets of movies where something happens to the woman Bond loves. But aside from that, you really don't need to sit down and watch all the other ones. And I feel like that seems like a good argument against, that the sequels are lesser films. But at the same time, if you watch Infinity War or Endgame without watching any of the other Marvel movies, I don't think you'd follow what's happening, but you might not get the full appreciation for it. And I think that's where a lot of people come from, is that the emotional work to, take a character from one place to the next place, or to, kind of influence, kind of make us feel something for those characters. That heavy lifting is done in the first one or in the previous movies that come before. And so that seems like an argument for like the idea that, sequels are lesser films because they don't necessarily have to set up all those kind of things and motivations and arcs and all that stuff. And I'm trying hard not to jump into my is that my alarm going off? I'm trying hard not to jump into my follow-up question, but that's what I have. So yeah,
I think man, I'm gonna come down on a side so that I can argue with someone, because you're having to kind of argue both sides right now. And I'm gonna say that kind of obviously not that I definitely don't want to live in a world where a sequel cannot surpass the movie that came before it. Partially just because I'm such a huge sequel fan. I'll definitely be thinking about for a while what you said of just how often that argument is made, especially with Star Wars. But I made it recently in the MCU too, to give Iron Man kind of a boost above just not its merits and then what it led to, and what it introduced, kind of thing. But yeah, I think that's really fascinating, and I'm going to come down on the side of, but with that a sequel can surpass its predecessor, but I have no philosophy to back that up. It's a gut reaction, and there's something about the fact that I can think of movies that are significantly worse than their predecessor that makes me think that the ones that you like it better than the movie that came before it, and if it to the extent that there is such a thing as objective criticism, it's objectively better than the one that came before it, then yeah, make room for that. In June, where do you land?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what both of you have said. I think that Yeah, I definitely land on the side of like no, right? Like yeah, like a sequel can be um, as just as good or even better than the movie that came before it. I think that because I think it's right, because like Jordan, like you said with James Bond, like I think it's important to James Bond as a sequel is a very different kind of sequel than Empire Strikes Back, right? Whereas James Bond, right, I mean, you already said this, but like, yeah, it's very a lot. Most of those movies are very standalone, and a lot of those movies could be the quote unquote the first movie, right? Or like, you don't really need uh, any sort of prior knowledge. And I think that um, I was going to say something else and I don't remember. But yes, I don't think that's true. And I feel like you know the no, I don't know. That was it.
Jordan, where do you land? Or will you play devil's advocate? But who's the devil?
I mean, so I'm kind of on the fence. I think, like Injun said, it depends on the movie. You know, if so, something like James Bond, like obviously that kind of character, that kind of story, you don't need to rely. You know, those are, I think, part of the reasons a lot of those sequels are just as good or not better than Doctor No is it's almost a way of like not remaking the same movie, but it's just, you know, Bond goes on an adventure, and you know it's just a matter of that one singular story with no connection to anything else, and that's kind of what makes it awesome is you don't have to tie in Bond stories with each other, and just because of the nature of that character, um, you know, that gives the sequels more opportunity to go different places and try new things. Whereas some sequels, like let's say, for instance, the I'm trying to think, this is the first one that comes to mind, like Episode 7, Star Wars Episode 7, right? That
Yeah.
movie, you know, has a lot of questions at the end of it, and so that really puts Episode 8 automatically in a corner of you have to address these things. And you could look at it as in one way, you know, you have to address those things. You can't just go off and do your own adventure necessarily following up that movie. Like you would have to address certain things. And actually, this is a terrible example because there's arguments about this about Episode 8. But
Right,
you know what I'm
right.
saying? If there's a question, if there's a unresolved conflict, you have to, like Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, you have to show Frodo going on his journey. There's only so much you can do with that. You can't say, obviously because these were books too, but you can't say, hey, let's have Frodo join up with the rest of the crew and everything when you set up the fact that he's going on this road alone.
Or if
Go
you
ahead.
want to choose if you want to choose Star Wars, but keep within filmmakers who are more on the same page, Empire to Return of the Jedi.
Right, and exactly. And so some movies do that really well, and because they have the benefit of the emotional kind of heavy lifting from the first movie, they're able to take that and use that and make it almost better, just by being a sequel. So one instance of that I think is Days of Future Past. I think is a really good example of a movie that takes all of the movies that came before and really uses kind of what we've seen from that and elevates the material. And you know, is that necessary? Because it's a sequel, people might say, oh, because it's a sequel, you know, it's a lesser movie. But then I would compare like something like Days of Future Past against, you know, I guess against a Bond movie. Keep going back to that. Like, you're never going to get that emotional connection with James Bond. Parts of that is because the character itself, but then other parts of that is just part of the reason why is that, you know, well, why don't we do a 3 episode or 3 movie or 4 movie arc with Bond going on one journey. Let's go through that with him together and try to, go a little bit deeper than what audiences are expecting. So that's my long-winded way of saying I don't know. I think it depends on the movie. And I think this would be a good point for the follow-up question, which is, is there a difference between a sequel and a movie that heavily relies on intertextuality, which is for audience or viewers or whoever doesn't know, intertextuality is essentially how a film relates to another film, or not even a film, just a text or piece of media or something in general. For instance, let me think of a good example. Well, this is kind of more on the nose, but like The Shining, the movie, is a direct adaptation of The Shining, the book. So part of what you're thinking while you're watching The Shining is you're thinking about The Shining book if you've read it. And then there's other things like the MCU movies, where those are movies that are interconnected, and your understanding of those movies and enjoyment is enhanced by how much or how little you've seen of it. And so, and again, that's a sequel, but movies that use a lot of intertextuality, meaning they like rely on other pieces of media or films or stories or whatever, something like Ready Player One, where there's literally all these different characters from different media and books and stories and films in one kind of film. Super 8 or Stranger Things, those movies are really reminiscent of the 80s Spielberg films. And so part of your enjoyment and understanding of those films / TV show is going to come from how much you remember about the 80s Spielberg films. And then even in like kind of more serious, I hate that word serious, but like more kind of adult movies, like Once Upon a Time in the West. Part of the reason that movie works with the villain so well is because Henry Fonda, who plays the villain, usually played the good guy in every single Western before that one. And to see him play a bad guy affected your viewing of the movie. And so I think that's enough examples for me to kind of frame the question, but I'll throw that back out at you guys. Is there a difference between, a sequel or a movie that really relies on intertextuality? And not the obvious difference, just like, what's kind of the differences and similarities between the two?
I'm going to draw I'm going to ask sort of a side question or propose a side question, because I think something that your first question pointed out, Jordan, is that we need to expand our vocabulary around sequels, because there is I could almost think of 3 kinds of sequels, and this is ridiculous too, because there's already so many words around reboot and remake and sequel and prequel and all that kind of thing. But going back to some examples that we've visited a bunch, you've got Star Wars, which is taking one story and telling the one story over the arc of different films. You have James Bond, or say Indiana Jones, where it's one person getting into sort of different scrapes, following some kind of formula. And they are sequels, but they're also very much not in a way. Like, for the fact that James Bond should be much older than he is right now. If Casino Royale is a sequel to Dr. No, then there's like a lot of explaining to do. And then the third thing, which is this new thing, which is this interconnected universes. So like, is Guardians of the Galaxy a sequel to Iron Man? So it's all, you kind of have 3 different things. So this is I don't know, Jordan, if you would consider taking the Guardians of the Galaxy and Iron Man. Would you consider that an example of intertextuality?
I think a better way for me to phrase it is, Yes, sequels by definition have to use. There's intertextuality in that too, because just by definition, because they're sequels. I think a better way to phrase my question would be, what's the difference, if any, between a sequel and an original film that relies on heavy textual or intertextuality, like Quentin Tarantino's films all rely to some extent on the films that came before him. Shaun of the Dead, another example. It's not a parody movie, but it is a comedy that pokes fun at the tropes of zombie movies. Even like 80s Schwarzenegger and Stallone action movies, there was a time when action stars, that was kind of the selling point. I think on the poster for Rambo, it said, this time he's fighting for his life, referencing Rocky Balboa, which was his previous movie before that. So, movies that are original, they aren't sequels, but heavily rely on intertextuality.
Well, I'll say the obvious answer, which is that I definitely think there is a difference because, like in the example you just gave, like there's definitely a difference between Empire Strikes Back and Rambo. There's a difference between the relationship between Episode 4 and Episode 5 of Star Wars and whatever Rocky movie came out before Rambo and Rambo, for sure. So that's the obvious answer, but I feel like, Jordan, you might actually believe the counter argument, and I kind of want to hear now.
You cut out there a little bit for me.
Oh, sorry.
Same.
It was really good. No, I just said now that I've stated the obvious, which is just, that I would say there is a difference between relationship between Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 2, and the relationship between Rocky and Rambo. So that's like an obvious statement to make, but I'm kind of curious if you have something up your sleeve, Jordan, for an argument that in a way those movies are sequels.
I do not know.
Oh, okay.
I'm just curious what, is one thing better than the other to you? Is one thing more original? Is, what are some ways there's overlap there between how they function as kind of texts in movies? I'm just curious for your guys' thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and I agree with Andrew. Like yeah, there is a difference for sure. I think it's interesting because I feel like sequels are like direct sequels, right? Direct sequels are intertextual in the sense that like you kind of need to know what happened before this to understand what's happening now. Whereas I think those are really interesting examples that you gave, Jordan, about Once Upon a Time in the West and Super 8, and like which are I feel like that intertextuality is much more cultural. I feel like someone like Super 8, taking Super 8 for an example, someone who didn't grow up on 80s Spielberg, probably quite possibly not American, right? Like would have no real frame of reference for what this movie was trying to do, right? And I also think Super 8 is interesting because I also think like with Super 8, that like intertextuality was just as much for Abrams as it is for the audience. I feel like Abrams was like, oh yeah, like this is gonna be awesome for me because I love Spielberg's movies, so I'm gonna do this for me. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to unpack there, and like, yeah, I feel like Tarantino, like those sorts of cultural references are very specific to a certain time and places, movie taste, music tastes, art tastes, all of that, and like a lot of it goes over my head because I'm not really like into music. So yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, is what I'll say. I don't know. I hope that was sort of answering the question.
Jordan, we don't have any answers to your questions this week. We just
No,
think your
there's
questions are really interesting.
no there. I don't think there's really an answer to it necessarily. I'm just curious to hear your guys' thoughts, and because I feel like there could be an entire podcast on that alone. There's probably lots of thesis papers about sequels and intertextuality and like the merits of being original. How does that affect a movie? Does, like, if you care about originality, are you going to value Pulp Fiction more than you value Empire Strikes Back, when you could argue that, or maybe that's a bad Super 8 more than Empire Strikes Back, when Super 8 is largely a remake of E.T. to an extent, or other 80s movies. There's so much pulled in there. But Empire Strikes Back is kind of a movie that I don't think, back then existed in another way. I don't think a movie like that or a story like that existed in film specifically. So I'm curious. I was just curious what your guys' thoughts were on all that. I know it's a question with no real answer necessarily, but yeah.
What the best kind of questions?
Can I share my favorite? Jordan, you gave the example. I've never heard this word or used this word of intertextuality before, because I'm not as fancy as you guys. But
I don't know
my
about
favorite.
that.
Okay. My favorite example, casting wise, you mentioned that never happened was I'm totally blanking on the director of The Graduate.
Mike Nichols.
Yeah.
I was like, I know there's a currency somewhere in his name. Mike Nichols wanted to cast Doris Day to play Mrs. Robinson, which I think would have just been so. It would have been so cool, especially as I mentioned last week. Like, I grew up on a lot of older movies, so with Doris Day's reputation as like a total golden girl and just like perfect clean living and stuff, I think she could have been so fascinating to see her in that role.
And that brings up another interesting casting. Like, think about the effect of casting Mel Gibson in Mad Max Fury Road, what that would have done. Suddenly Mad Max Fury Road, that's a very this doesn't make sense, but the word kind of feels right to me. It's a very youthful movie. It feels like something new. It's very exciting. It's very fast paced. And part of that could be because of Tom Hardy, because he's this new, younger Mad Max. Maybe he's the same guy, but it's just a different actor. But if you put, 50, 60, however old Mel Gibson is, you put him in that movie, I think, it takes on a different tone. The pace wouldn't necessarily change, but I think something happens to that movie which I think changes it. Not for better or for worse. I think it's just a matter of, your opinion necessarily. But it does have I think that would have an effect on Fury Road if Mel Gibson was still playing Mad Max.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, especially including all the baggage that Mel Gibson brings into a movie.
Yes.
But even apart from that, completely. Jordan, do you have any more follow-ups on your questions that we didn't answer for you?
I don't think so. No, I think that's it.
All right, then I'm going to lead us into some rapid fire. Oh no,
your question. You got to do
my
yours.
question. I forgot. If you could, let's say, a magical elfin being, such as Rumpelstiltskin kind of character, came up to you and they were like, "I'm going to take your foot, but in exchange, I'm going to bring a movie from an alternate reality where this sequel got made.
Why am I?
I don't remember how I.
Because
I don't remember how I
Quentin
phrased it.
Tarantino in disguise. That's why.
So you definitely have to give up a limb to have this movie be made, but you get to choose. It's a sequel that has never been made and probably never will be made. So not necessarily, this isn't like what sequel are you most looking forward to, although that would be a fun rapid fire question. If this is what sequel does it just break your heart? Never came about. Maybe it was teased at some point. Maybe it wasn't. I can give some examples, or I can just let you go.
I'm just gonna say that I'm worried that if you're gonna ask me this question after December, I'm worried that I'm gonna say Dune. Let's put it that way.
So wait, unpack that for me. Wait, is Dune a? Oh, you're worried. Oh, okay. No, you're worried that the same creative team won't be behind it. That there won't be a sequel to Dune. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's what a lot of people have been saying about like, oh, it's because right, just looking at Blade Runner 2049, it didn't make very much money. Dune is kind of similar in a lot of ways in terms of the scale of production and the potential audience, and people are very and it's also a movie that would suffer very, very greatly without its sequel potentially. You know, and so a lot of people are worried that it's going to flop and there isn't going to be a Denis Villeneuve part 2.
Isn't he? Did they film it back to back?
Can I
Because he
consider
did
that a
split the
flop?
book up into 2 parts, didn't he?
Yeah, they did split it up, and I think I don't think they're filming back to back though.
Oh,
But I think
no.
I think the
Wow.
plan. I know, yeah. It's a gamble.
Ah,
It's a gamble
they
for
did that
sure.
with It Chapter 2 as well, Warner Brothers. That's what the same thing they did.
Oh no.
The sequel to It wasn't greenlit until after the first one came out. That's interesting.
Geez. Oh jeez.
Which makes sense. I mean, if you're losing money,
Yeah.
I mean, from a studio
Business.
standpoint.
Yeah, for sure.
If this is. Do you think that The Hobbit would have had 2 sequels if they hadn't had that approach? Maybe one.
They filmed The Hobbit back to back, but
right.
there
That's
was
what I'm saying is, do you think that method actually is? Do you think if they had waited and seen what the, how much money it made, what the reception was, would they have done more?
No. There were so many other problems behind the production of that movie. Like that even like through the 3 movie thing wasn't even the issue.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on, and it doesn't quite qualify as an answer to the question that I asked, but I would love to see Guillermo del Toro's The Hobbit. Like a big,
same.
Yes, big one. Okay, who's got a sequel that will never exist, but you long for it so much that you would be okay with giving a limb if you had to give a limb towards something?
I'm gonna just be pretty quick and say the thing that came to my mind without too much thought, which was John Carter 2.
Oh yeah.
with like Andy Stanton and everyone. I would have loved that. That would have been so cool. I would be willing to give my right arm because I'm left-handed.
Okay.
How generous.
Yeah, man, I need to revisit John Carter. It's becoming clear like that there's certain touchstone movies for the 3 of us that the other 2 need to catch up on. Jordan.
I don't think this qualifies. Kind of similar to your Hobbit answer, but George Lucas's sequel trilogy, with him writing and directing it. And like for personal reasons, I absolutely understand why he didn't. Like, I get it. He's old. He wants to spend time with his family. And but I think that would have been something really cool to see what he would have done to Star Wars, 10 years after with so much technology advancing, seeing where he would have taken the story. Even if they had just used his outlines in kind of notes, I think that would have been, I would have loved to see kind of what he had in mind for the saga. But I guess my actual qualifying answer would be so a sequel to the Evil Dead movie that came out in 2013 with the Mia and Ash character teaming up together, because there were talks of that, and that seems to have fallen through, especially after they focused on the Ash versus the Evil Dead TV show. But there was always, I think the idea was that they were going to cross over the two heroes of both those kind of Evil Dead movies and put them together, which I really would have loved to see.
And I've never seen the Evil Dead movies. And Jim, have you?
Me neither. No.
We're
Also,
so-
you know, Lucas's outlines are just like sitting in like Bob Iger's desk somewhere, and he's like, "Oh, thanks, George, but no thanks." But I'm gonna hold on to them.
They put him on.
sad.
I'll put this on the refrigerator, George, right there.
Yeah. Yeah, and he would have written it down too. I was listening to an interview with Lawrence Kasdan, and he said that George Lucas is really good about writing things down to be able to have something to start a conversation off of. I am gonna say, I know that I am gonna have a different answer later, because for me, a lot of my favorite franchises break down at the third movie. I'm just gonna, this is not on topic, but I just need to put this opinion out there while we're talking about sequels. I believe that if you took all of the sequels that were released in theaters, so I'm not counting direct-to-video sequels, or at least sequels that were given the same level of release as the first one. So if it's a Netflix movie, then it's Netflix movie part 2. But if it was released in theaters, then it's a theatrical release part 2. I think it's probably like exactly 50-50 in terms of mediocrity versus like really good storytelling. But I'm also, like I said last week, I am a huge sucker for sequels, and I really, really love and it's my favorite thing to do as a filmmaker too, is to take something that's there and build on it and like expand and surprise and all of that. So I just needed to go on the record saying that I think sequels in general get a bad rap. For me, I think it might be Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy 3.
That's such a good one. Nice.
I really I like Hellboy. I really like Hellboy 2. And I'd really love to see I feel like they were picking up momentum, and I would love to see a Hellboy 3.
And the Hellboy we got was trash, apparently. So there's that.
I didn't see it.
I haven't seen it. I probably shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
Sad.
Great. Well, we did long form questions. Yay. All right. How much time do we have left? We got to wrap this up, don't we?
Well, it's 59 minutes, so we can do some quick questions, I think.
In June, how many more minutes should we give this?
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 quick questions. I like it.
Okay,
I
great.
like the quick questions.
What's that?
I like the quick questions.
Okay, great. All right, let's do rapid fire. Let's just real quick. What is your favorite sequel of all time?
Oh my God, that is a big question.
Just real quick. No, that's not a rapid fire question. Okay.
Oh, that's rough.
You answer
Here,
first,
I'll
and
do
then
an,
we'll
I'll do an
answer.
easier one. I'll do an easier one. What is a series that you have never seen and you feel kind of culturally in the dark, that you've never seen? For example, for me, there's a bunch, but I'm gonna say like Lethal Weapon. I feel like Lethal Weapon. Anyway, there's a bunch of 80s franchises that I haven't seen a single Rocky movie except for Creed and what's the series that nope, I lost it. The person who Shane Black. What's his like 80s buddy cop?
Lethal Weapon.
Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, I think that was
Yeah. So
Uh,
Rocky and Lethal Weapon.
I think for me, going in that same vein, I've never seen a single Terminator movie.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and I think that's sad.
Yeah. And we spoiled Terminator 2 for you last week.
Yes, I did not know any of those plot details.
Jordan, you've seen it all?
No, but like what I haven't seen, it's like I'm not motivated enough. Like I'm fine with not see. Like I'll get there when I get there.
Yeah. But
Like,
but what do other people? What have other people seen a lot of that?
Mission Impossible, I guess. I saw the last one.
Oh,
Yes.
that's
And I've
true.
seen parts
That's a
of
good one.
I've seen parts of 3, but I'm in no rush, and I'll watch them when I watch them. You know, at some point I'll sit down and be like, "Wow, that was some really good movies right there." And then I'll save that for another time. Like I'm not like hard pressed to rush out and like, you know, get all the Mission Impossible movies.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
Oh, you know, the Star Trek movies. I've seen the shows. I've seen a couple of the movies, but I haven't seen all of them, and I'd like to actually see all those. That's my answer. Star Trek. Even though I've seen most of it, I just not all the movies.
I've only
This
seen
one. You've only seen the reboots or the J.J. Abrams.
Yeah.
Or I guess the third.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Beyond Disney.
Yeah.
Okay, this question comes from Jordan. I stole it from him. What is your favorite sequel directed by a different director than the first movie? So basically, it's a different creative team. I'm not so much looking for Empire Strikes Back, because that's still like very much a George Lucas movie, but where it was like a different creative team that made the sequel. And oh man, I feel so ignorant. Who did? No, never mind. Good. Inji, what were you gonna say?
I think I came up with the answer for your original first question, which was what's your favorite sequel? And I think this applies there, which is Blade Runner 2049.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Different team, different creator, different director. But I also think Villeneuve was like the perfect director for a sequel to Blade Runner. So good. After Arrival, so good. Yeah.
Really good.
I think for your first question that we didn't do, I think Lord of the Rings, that's got to be my favorite. Like those two sequels have to be my favorite. A rare case where they film a whole trilogy back to back.
Yeah.
Like I haven't heard of that. You know, it doesn't happen often. So I think that's pretty cool. I think that's partially why it benefited so much, those sequels. Favorite sequel not by original director. I think I think Prisoner of Azkaban. That'd be one of my answers. Now it's the same producers. I think it's a different writer than the first two, but overall
same
it's
writer.
the same production,
Same
right? It's the same production team, but you definitely feel that presence of the director. So I think that's going to be my argument for it. Why it should count, because visually, just like tone-wise, it's a total like change from the first two Harry Potter movies. Even though most of the creative team was still there.
I think Alien is okay, but I really like Aliens a lot. I think Aliens is so good, and it's just a different. It's even a different genre. It's but it's so good. I love it so much. What sequel are you most looking forward to? Now, this is the opposite of my long form question. This is a sequel that is going to happen. Wait.
Snyder Cut, baby. Justice League.
Okay. Yep. So because to you, the Justice League hasn't come out yet, so it like there was a fan.
It was completely different.
Yeah.
It was completely different. He shot 3.5 hours, almost 4 hours of a movie. They used 30 minutes of his footage. 30 minutes out of a for 3.5 hours. You know, a movie we haven't seen yet. Do you know how much different it's? Do you know how much better it's gonna be? It is a completely different movie.
DCEU is Zack Snyder like kind of reigning again in the DCEU after Justice League failed, after Joss Whedon's Justice League failed.
So what was the question? I missed the first part of that.
Oh, sorry. Is Zack Snyder back as like the DCEU doesn't really have a Kevin Feige, but is he back as kind of the Kevin Feige of the DCEU?
Well, so his original. How much more time do you guys want to spend on this? I can go on this forever. I'll try to sum it up quickly.
These are rapid fire questions.
Hold up. The DCEU was never trying to be. They didn't want to do Marvel. They wanted to do Lord of the Rings. It was the fans who, after Batman v Superman, the angry fans and the critics who kept complaining and comparing them to Marvel, which forced them to course correct. Didn't force them. I would say harassed into course correcting majorly with Suicide Squad and Justice League. So the intention was never to be like the MCU. The intention was to copy the Chris Nolan model or the Lord of the Rings model, where it's like, hey, we have a complete arc set within these films. There'll be some spin-offs, but then after that last film, it'll be done and it'll be out for good. Like, and then we'll just move on and reboot everything else. So that was always the intention. And it seems to be like they're very much, after all the fan reaction, they're like, oh, we made a mistake. Let's go back to this original arc that we had planned. And so that seems to be what's going on now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, wait, Injun, did you get a chance to answer that question? I
was just going to say, again, kind of the first thing that comes to mind that I was genuinely really excited for because before this whole coronavirus thing happened, which is No Time to Die. It's going to be Daniel Craig's last one, right? It's going to be Cary Fukunaga, who I love. Like, I was ready. I am still ready.
Yeah.
I just have to.
Yeah. That's a great answer. And I don't have an answer except I'm going to be on brand for myself. It's the most Marvel-y guy and say Thor: Love and Thunder because I think Taika Waititi did such a good job with every breath he takes. He seems to be just doing a great job. But he's bringing a lot to Marvel that's just missing. Feels like it's missing and works really well. And I'm excited for Natalie Portman to like have really well written lines to say and like stuff to do and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. What series do you feel like is the least flawed series? This is maybe a
Wait,
long.
how do we define a series? How many movies?
Okay. I'm going to say anything that we've talked about from I'm going to say not the MCU, but I'm going to say James Bond to Star Wars to Terminator. I'm looking especially, those movies that have like a 4 or 5 movie run.
Yeah.
So I guess, how about this? More than 2, fewer than 100.
Okay.
And so this is not so much the best series with the highest highs, but with the fewest lows. So it's not how good is Alien, but how bad is Alien 4.
Well,
And I have an
if it's
answer.
if it's only over like, oh, I guess never mind. I was gonna say if it was only over 2 movies, then I would say the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But there is a mixed reception on The Hobbit, which I kind of disagree with. I would say that 2 of the Hobbit movies are good. Like
Which ones?
like super. I mean, the first 2. I think the first 2 are super solid, and I still love the third. I don't want to get into a tangent on The Hobbit at the end of this. There's a lot for me to enjoy in all the Hobbit movies. I personally really love all the Hobbit movies, but there's a pretty big difference between the third Hobbit movie and like the rest of the series, I would say, in terms of like consistency. And that's not me ragging on the Hobbit. I still really enjoy those movies, all of them.
Said like a typical Grown Ups 2 fan. Yeah.
Yep.
Should I answer my own question? Cause this one, like, you kind of, I'm going to say Toy Story. I think that the 4 Toy Story movies are, in my opinion, are almost perfectly equal, and they're all really good. And so, yeah, that's my answer.
Nice. I'm gonna say Mission Impossible.
Oh,
I know the second one isn't great. I've only seen it once and I don't remember it. So that's what we're gonna say about that. But I think they're all, especially, honestly, all of them are like really cool.
Have you seen the first one recently? I watched the first about a year ago.
Not recently, but I've seen it more than once.
Okay.
Which is more than I can say for the second one.
Gotcha. It is loose. It is a loose movie. Yeah. Just as compared to what's coming down the track in the later ones, it's shocking, the pace of that movie.
Yeah.
Jordan, you said, would you say Lord of the Rings?
I would argue Lord of the Rings and also Star Wars, because I would say that the majority of Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, those movies are good. And X-Men.
We're looking at the weakest link. Is the worst Star Wars movie better than the worst Toy Story movie or the worst Mission Impossible?
I think I still say Lord of the Rings, actually.
Great.
Nice.
Great. Okay, well then let's wrap it up. If you have a pop culture recommendation, I thought we could give those real quick. Just like something we're watching or reading or listening to right now, and then sign off. And I'll go first, and I'm just gonna go. I'm actually going to just really highly recommend the books of Liane Moriarty. Um, she wrote Big Little Lies, which is at least a title that people have heard of. And that book has like the best premise for it's not truly a mystery novel, but there is, very soon in the book that somebody killed someone. But not only do you not know who the killer is, you also don't know who died. And then you go back and you're getting this whole story while the whole time it's in the back of your head, you're wondering who of these characters you mean is going to die. And just all of her books are so good at keeping every single part of your brain engaged the whole time you're reading it. It's hard to classify her, and I'm sure she's been classified as like a romance novelist, but she tends to do like family dramas that just have a big hook in them. And the last one I read of hers was What Alice Forgot, which is just a really simple book. In that it's just a woman who has amnesia and she can't remember the last 10 years of her life, and she finds herself in this role as like she's a mom and she wasn't a mom before, and she and her husband are getting divorced, and she's like trying to put the pieces together of her life. So it's very simple and kind of a soap opera premise, but it also functions as kind of a time travel book because you have what she remembers, and then it's functionally the same as if she had traveled 10 years in the future and discovered like what her life is, and she has to sort through what she wants to keep from her old life and from her new life. Anyway,
so she wasn't found in the middle of the Baltic Sea with like 3 bullets in her back and like a little code for a Swiss bank or something.
Plot twist.
Sorry, I was just
a Jason Bourne crossover.
I was just reminding me.
No. She takes that one little bit that's like really dramatic, but then really grounds it in like amazing characters. And I think like you're only supposed to read her books if you're like 40 and a mom. And her books are so, not to disparage 40-year-old moms, but her books are so good. The end. Is my pop culture recommendation.
Jordan.
So this is a website, but I've been reading through the Silmarillion for the first time ever.
Hey.
I've read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit a bunch, but I've always wanted to, never have read Silmarillion. And as soon as I read through the first little bit, I was like, oh man, I need help because I don't understand any. Like I understood like the first few chapters, but then after that, it's wow. This is like you need an. I seriously, I have a notebook where I take notes as I'm reading. It's like a history mythology. So there's this great website called Silmarillion Writers Guild, and it's a website essentially dedicated to understanding and discussing the Silmarillion. And there's a specific chapter summary breakdown of each chapter, which is super helpful because it tells you what happens in the chapter very simply, without confusing you or overloading you with a bunch of names and places. Because it's really a book you need to read with a map and like a family tree and a notebook.
That's great.
Yeah,
great.
But awesome. It's a great website. I'd recommend to anyone who hasn't read Silmarillion, who wants to read the Silmarillion.
Do you read the chapter summaries before or after you read the chapter?
After. So I'll read the chapter summary, and then I'll take any notes that I have that I need to, for something I need to remember later.
That's awesome. In June, what you got?
I was gonna say, well, thinking about Bourne made me realize just how big of a gaffe I made by not mentioning Bourne Supremacy in this episode. Oh, yes. I love one. I was gonna say
different director. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's perfect. It's so good. That movie is so good. I was gonna say, I'm in the middle of very, very slowly reading Watchmen, which is wonderful and I started after I finished the show. So it's
First
been
time?
a while.
First time through? Oh, nice.
Totally.
Yes.
It's great. It's really great. Alan Moore, man. Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. They know what they're doing.
That is a great. There's this discussion there with intertextuality about the book and the movie and the show with Watchmen, I think in particular.
Yeah. It's true.
That's so good. Okay, well, thank you guys so much. And thank you, audience, for joining us on the second episode of Liking Movies. As you can see, we do like movies. And that's it. And so I'm just going to say goodbye. Thanks so much, guys. This has been so great.
This was wonderful.